Hello everyone, and welcome to the third and final in the UK Finance's hosted Strong Customer Authentication Behavioral Biometrics Vendor Roadshow series. We will be presenting a series of recorded webinars that will be on our UK Finance website for on-demand to view. And a reminder to all those that are viewing, the contents of this webinar are either owned by UK Finance or facilitated by UK Finance on behalf of the content owner. By way of a bit of background, at the FCA Monitoring Forum on Strong Customer Authentication in January, it was agreed or endorsed the use of behavioral biometrics as a second factor to OTP. And the FCA kind of wrote to UK Finance to that effect, as you can see on your screen. We received feedback from card issuers who are unsure about the different solutions available out in the market and requested UK Finance to host a vendor roadshow like this. So the purpose of this roadshow is as such to kind of give all card issuers viewing an idea of the different solutions out in the market and provide a kind of a neutral platform for vendors to showcase their solutions. From the outset, we want to make clear that we, as UK Finance, do not endorse any particular vendor or vendor solution. We also want to note that we are not making a compliance, point around any of the vendor solutions, and that is for each individual organization to ensure that they are complying with the regulations. I also want to note that any of the card issuers that might be interested in some of these vendors, please reach out directly. We have provided numerous avenues in which you can communicate and contact the vendors on the webinar. So please do so. We will not be involved with that as UK Finance. And as a bit about the format of the webinar, we are taking like a lightning talk kind of format, so it will be 15 minutes for each vendor. On the webinar today, we have 3 vendors. We have Joshua Bower-Saul, Chief Executive and co-founder of Cybertonica. We have Eric Gilmore, Head of Pre-Sales at Dayon. And we have James Pimborough, SCA Product Manager at Certify, which is an American Express company. And I myself, Rizwan Khan, am your host. So without further ado, we'll push on to first presenter, Joshua Bower-Saul, Cybertonica. Over to you, Josh.
Thanks, Riz. Well, we're very pleased to be here today, and particularly with a lot of distinguished colleagues working in this area. And I wanted to start by saying that Cybertonica is a business that is trying to remove friction from global commerce and remove fraud at the same time. So this is a goal that many of us share. The behavioral SCA portion of what we do originated not in the recent past, but many years ago when, with Sergey, my co-founder, we realized that the entire process that we're all facing in terms of bringing together diverse types of data to understand how they represent entities, their behavior, their risk, and their potential to commit or be attacked in some way by fraud or other types of cyber threats. We're in the future going to converge into a series of offers that had to cover all the bases at once. And so we originally built a platform called Anomalytics, and that platform is there to process all the data we collect, including behavioral data, including open banking data, risk data, and fraud prevention types of data. Now, if we go to the slides, what we see is that we've made a specific offer over the last couple of years. We've done research and development. We've worked with millions of devices simultaneously to develop a product that is specifically emphasizing the behavioral aspects of SCA. Now, I think we've already gone through the process of talking with the regulators, determining what is possible in this area and what would be respectively meeting the regulators' demands, but also offering a much better customer experience, a much cheaper way of performing SCA, and particularly at the level of inherence, which is what behavioral biometrics, as it's called by the regulators, refers to. So Cybertonica's BehaviouralID product is there to manage that junction between the future of behavioral authentication and the existing fraud prevention and risk measurement in real time. We have both of those pieces covered. Now, what we're going to cover here in the next few minutes with you is how behavioral SCA works, and how does it meet the regulations for the new regime of authentication that's coming, and the PSD2 regulation. What that legislation says we'll cover briefly, and what Cybertonica do in relation to that requirement, and how does BehaviourID, our particular product, differ from other BB, as they call it, solutions, behavioral biometrics. So we're not saying we've got the answer to all the questions. We're saying that we've worked hard to understand how this new area can improve accuracy, limit false positives, and what's most important, we think, for the future, give a privacy quotient while at the same time using data to provide frictionless customer access to services, potentially even to services as widespread as from payments to visas. There's a lot of controversy around how behavioral biometrics is going to achieve this. We think we've got part of the answer, and we're very keen to work with our colleagues here today or others and institutions and regulators to achieve more of a satisfactory response. We're then going to cover why the incumbent solutions have created friction and why they're being replaced bit by new technology and innovation, and what are the benefits of this form of SCA to the actual users, both on the business-to-business side, but also the consumer themselves. And we'll talk briefly about how we approach it as a business, as a flexible installation process, right? The industry recommended approach, so paragraph 19, as it's called, about inherence, tells us that you can use lots of different types of either biometrics, which we refer to as fingerprint scanning, iris scanning, face recognition, hand geometry, etc. Hand geometry is, by the way, identifying the shape or qualities of the hand around or on the device. There's also, of course, voice recognition. You have companies like PinDrop, keystroke dynamics. These have come into play most recently as a kind of focus of behavioral biometrics. But in a way, we feel like the regulator hasn't seen the full span of possibilities around behavioral biometrics, and I'll talk about that. For the moment, it's very reductive in our view to just a few strokes of the keys to identify a person. We do not do that. We do hundreds of data points. So let's talk about the aims of the legislation briefly. We want to reduce account takeover. We want to reduce OTP fraud, which is a problem, one even recognized by Citibank and other big players we've talked to. Phishing protection and social engineering defense are also part of this. So we want it to be such that without a password change or an OTP or other type of interface, a user will be prevented from making the same payment with the same card on the same device as somebody who is actually the owner of the device standing next to them, for example, in a test situation. And we've achieved that technologically. Now we have to scale that and work with other data to make it even more foolproof. We also want to be detecting technology that's used on the user side, the client side, for fraudulent purposes. How has it been connected to other frauds in the past? All of this in real time. So you can imagine the volume of machine learning and data crunching we're doing. And then the onboarding verification process also is subject to twinning behaviors and onboarding profiles. And that is going to give us a baseline for that particular actor in the system. Once we know that baseline, we don't need the KYC data anymore. We don't need the ID data anymore. We just need to have the token relevant to those profiles and the behavior tracking that we'll be doing. This behavior tracking will be GDPR respective, and it will also respect privacy because it's all hashed and encrypted data. It's not going to be personal data flying around between our server bases or our SaaS and the users, obviously. So that's the industry recommended approach and how we fit in. So we call, in fact, our behavioral ID product the future of frictionless identity technology. So we call that FIT, and we say Cybertonica's behavioral ID is fit for purpose. We are striving to do the R&D in a way that always matches. In fact, we started from the point of view that PSD2 was going to be around and SCA was going to be around a lot sooner, as many of you did. Several years ago, we started reflecting on this with our team and doing the research. The goals of our research that we're now attaining, and we're about to launch this product, is between 80 and 90% pure behavior ID accuracy. To give you a clear number, we looked at hundreds of thousands, for example, of credit applications. And we used only our ID, behavior ID technology to detect what we felt were suspect patterns in applications for consumer credit. We were able, within 100,000 cases, to determine that there was about a 10 to 15% rate. I only say about because we didn't go beyond into the deep analysis of this. That wasn't the purpose of that particular effort. But we did determine and then convince, along with the data from the bank that we were working with, the adjusters to see that there was a very high rate of automated fraudulent applications. We were able to eliminate those. So these are savings in the millions of pounds that we can realize just using pure behavior ID technology. The second thing we want to do is say that one of the things we do with the Anomalytics platform, the data crunching machine learning platform at the base of this, is we don't look for every case. We look for accuracy in changes of behavior. And then we model those changes of behavior so we know what they mean. So if we see, obviously, an IP address being used with a mobile phone that was used in Hong Kong this morning being used 2 hours later in London, we know there's something suspect, for example. And in 97 to 99% of those cases, we will be highly accurate in determining that change of behavior just with the behavioral ID product. And then we leverage that behavior score to improve at the same time our risk and fraud controls. So one of the things we've been working to correct in the market, I think, is we've had a lot of siloed products, 1, 2, 3 products, maybe 4 or 5 products, KYC, behavioral, fraud prevention. We've brought those all together in one whole. And that's where we think the future is going to take us in behavioral SCA. Obviously, we also do keystroke dynamics. On this slide, you can see that we know that many players use simple keystrokes to determine owner presence, but we don't think that's going far enough. We really want to reduce from the first interface within 2 seconds to about 5% the risk of false positives. And at that point, we can always trigger further verifications or further authentication forms, including OTP. But it's really a question of getting that process so frictionless that over time, we're producing better and better results. And then we use also within our clients, we can connect into their CRM and their banking data, which they have personalized, and they can tell us, for example, automatically whether that particular device has been changed, a new number is attached to that account or card, etc. So these are the kinds of automated deployments we're working on. And we want to make that an installation process that's very, very easy. One of the key areas we're working on and have had a great deal of success on is gyroscopic phone movement. So this is absolutely essential to understand whether a phone is being held in a stationary stand. Let's remember again that we're talking about fraud as an industry. There is an industry of fraudsters. And I think what people tend not to realize is that there are places where there are hundreds of SIM cards installed in a motionless stand that are operating to create fraudulent transactions and to capture, for example, mocking OTP or malware on the phone. We track all of these movements to make sure that this phone is alive and that person is moving in the way they normally move as an entity. We don't care who they are, a woman, man, older, younger. We can tell within a very good framework exactly whether they are that person or not. And that is one of the key additions we've brought to the game, I think, is the tilt angles, fixed and average behaviors of phone movement. Beyond that, obviously, mouse movement, swiping speed, these types of things are tracked by us. These sometimes require a user agreement, but it's all within GDPR Article 4 of improving security and improving international commerce results. So we've checked that in terms, we're getting more legal advice, obviously, every day, but we've checked that to make sure that it corresponds to the GDPR. Bots, malware, and emulators, we track those consistently because Anomalytics platform tracks those even on the dark web every day, every second, and updates all of our models, including our behavioral model, with rogue program malware that's being noticed in the web and so on. So these types of things help us to be a bit ahead of the game because we're combining our Anomalytics platform with our behavioral ID product. Finally, integration and specifications. It only takes a few days to get a JavaScript or an installed SDK up and running with most of the organizations we work with. And this tends to give us enough time then to practice in a parallel deployment with a portion of customers, a portion of accounts, if you will. And that allows us then to build our models in real time as we get ready to launch into a production environment. And during this time, we gather all the information we need, both about the requirements on security side, the encryption levels, and this doesn't cause us a problem because we have encryption as a standard, a very high level of encryption as standard with all of our products. So then we begin to work more closely with any organization about the overall types of fraud and the overall help that the SCA can be covered with our behavioral ID product. And one of the things you can see in the UI that we have is it also is developed to allow risk and fraud officers the absolute transparent vision of what's going on their systems at any time, both in terms of the UI that we've done, which can be customized, it's more or less widget driven, and then also the individual scores on the data points that we're collecting. And it's not a black box. You've got access to policy, you've got access to the way things are collected. And the idea is that we're going to have this unique behavior ID for each person that's in the system, or each entity, if it's a business entity, and that is going to be tokenized within your system and tracked and used as part of the management information supplying back to your risk officers, back to your fraud officers, but also to your account officers who can learn a great deal and have a great deal of insight from this data. We also cross-reference all the threats that we see. So these might be malware threats. These might be other types of threats that are on the web that we become aware of. And these are integrated immediately into the model. There's no waiting. It's done in real time. And then there's a dialogue page that allows any risk officers to dialogue with our service in a very supported way. One of the examples we give is the mouse movements, which if you've clicked on the live slide to the right of this on our behavioral biometrics and SCA slide, you'll see actual movements that we've recorded on various websites, devices, mobile applications. And this gives us all of these things in real time, so we can then map them and compare them using machine learning to give you outputs about what's going on your interfaces and who's using what device. It can be used also, by the way, for internal security, so not allowing one worker to get access to another worker's mouse pad or phone at any point in time, or tracking how those phones are used within the building, or if we go back to buildings, into physical presences. So that's one of the key things that we think will also help us to collaborate with the entire security and risk team. So I think that's, in essence, what we have to offer to the market. And we're very collaborative. We're working with some other people doing data analytics. We have our own data analytics team, and we're having our first rollouts in the EU now. We've had some rollouts outside the EU. We'll have more where risk is higher, in fact, and where this can supply a real solution for people who don't have access to full fraud platforms. The behavioral biometrics can do about 80% of the job. So what we're saying is lower cost, single token user entities that are tracked in a way that is respecting the GDPR and easy to install and run on millions of devices. We think that we can achieve everything that we want to achieve and the industry wants to achieve with SCA, and improve at the same time to a very high level both the fraud control and also the SCA requirements. So that's what I would say about Cybertonica's Behavior ID today, and thank you for watching this video.
Thank you, Joshua. And for everyone there, Joshua's contact details and organization contact details are on the screen. Right. We can now move on to